hope you're enjoying today's sessions. I know I am. When it comes to coping with the pandemic recovery, we need all the tools we can get. Our Resilience Toolkit sessions will give you that practical information that will help you plan for the future. Par ailleurs, un grand merci à l'Association touristique autochtone du Canada, qui est le commanditaire de notre séance Autosoin 101. And a big thank you to the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada for sponsoring our Self-Care 101 session. Enjoy!
Welcome, everyone. My name is Michael Nadler, and I'm the Vice President for External Relations and Visitor Experience at Parks Canada. Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue. Je suis vraiment contente d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. Mon nom est Michael Nadler, je suis vice-président responsable des relations externes et l'expérience de visiteurs à Parcs Canada. Je vais être avec vous pour 30 minutes aujourd'hui pour une courte présentation sur nos expériences des dernières 9 mois et nos planifications pour l'avenir. Colleagues, it's just a great privilege to be part of the TIAC conference this year. I'm coming to you virtually from my basement office at my home, where the bandwidth is better for presentations like these. I will be together for about 30 minutes, and I'll be doing a short presentation on Parks Canada's experiences of the last 8 or 9 months, and also some of our lessons learned in planning for the coming 12 to 24 months. We'll hopefully spend a bit of time at the end for questions, and my colleague Mike Critchley will be helping to choreograph that part of the presentation. I'm just going to ask Mike whether I'm coming in clearly and whether people can hear me before I shift to share my screen with the presentation today.
Hi, Michael. There might have been a little bit of a bump with the audio at first, but everyone's saying you sound great now.
That is fantastic. So again, my name is Michael Nadler. I'm with Parks Canada, and it is a great privilege to join you today. Je suis Michael Nadler avec Parcs Canada et c'est vraiment un honneur d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. Je vais juste maintenant partager mon écran, donc ça va prendre juste quelques secondes. Et donc, j'espère que tout le monde puisse voir le premier diapo. Colleagues, again, I'll be speaking a little bit about Parks Canada's experience of the last 9 months and some of our lessons learned in our planning and preparations for the coming 12 to 24 months. And much of the tone and focus of the discussion will be on our experiences being an offer of nature-based tourism and nature-based recreational experiences across the country. Again, just to quickly go through sort of what I'd hope to share with you. I'll share a little bit about how Parks Canada planned and prepared for its response to the pandemic, our operations, again, of the last few months, some of the outcomes we heard and some reflections, but also, more importantly, next steps. And some of those actually involve some collaboration with partners in the tourism sector. Before we begin, juste un petit aperçu sur Parcs Canada lui-même. On est une agence responsable de 222 lieux partout au Canada. Parks Canada is an agency, a federal agency responsible for 222 protected places across the country. That's 46 national parks, 171 national historic sites, and 5 national marine conservation areas. We're a significant contributor to Canada's economy, and particularly the tourism industry and the recreation industry. So we receive around 25 million visitors each year. Our own investments in programming and activities annually right now are around 1.25 billion per year. That includes significant infrastructure investments. However, visitors to our places spend about 3.6 billion per year in the regions around Parks Canada locations. So that's our national parks and our national historic sites. And we've even broken down on the slide some divisions in that assessment. This economic analysis is developed collaboratively using methods that we worked on with Statistics Canada. And so you'll see that there's a breakdown even by jobs, by visitor type, in the regions and communities that are near Parks Canada places. Same day visitors, you'll see that overnight visitors, of course, generate more jobs and more more income, our Canadian visitation and our international visitation actually tends to create roughly parallel jobs, even though international visitation is significantly lower than domestic. But as I mentioned, our focus today is to talk about the last 9 months. And like many of you, the month of March was an unprecedented time for Parks Canada, and a time where we did things that we had never done before. And the most significant change for us, and it was truly an unprecedented event for us, we had never ever shut down access to our places. And so on March 18th, as part of the broad national effort to minimize and mitigate the spread of COVID-19, Parks Canada took this unprecedented step of restricting access to all of Parks Canada's places. We began in a more limited way. We began by reducing visitor services and limiting our offer. However, what we experienced was significant crowding in some locations, and an inability for us to manage that and mitigate the risks of transmission of COVID-19. And so shortly after, we took this unprecedented step of actually blocking vehicular access for visitors to our places. Those who had homes or those who were traveling through on highways were of course allowed to traverse our parks and historic sites, but visitors were not allowed to spend time at Parks Canada. This was completely opposite to our normal practices, and a significant adjustment for the agency. However, it did allow us a bit of time to begin preparation and planning for a resumption of services that were adapted to COVID-19. In that time period, we undertook some modest promotions just to try to share with Canadians how significant this change was for us, and express our understanding how significant it was for them as well. And so here is just a short social media video that we used during that time frame. And again, it reflects what others were doing at the same time. So as I mentioned, beginning in mid-March, we started to rapidly develop our strategy for resumption of services. We had some gates that we had to go through to obtain approval to resume services, and in fact, we were the first federal organization, facing the public to actually restart our services to Canadians. So some of those gates were more challenging than others. What we focused on, though, were 6 primary principles that guided all of our decision-making about the planning and preparation for resumption of services, all of the site-based planning and preparation, and all of our adaptive delivery of programming throughout the summer and fall as we learned lessons after starting services. So the first principle was that the health and safety of our visitors, our employees, and the communities and all Canadians that surround our places was paramount. That was a priority for us and was the core focus of all redesign of our programming. We're a national organization, and so we had to recognize that each region of Canada was taking slightly different approaches in their response to COVID-19. And so we had to design systems and approaches that were adaptable and flexible, and that could be modified to reflect regional circumstances. We undertook an incremental resumption of our services that were aligned with our capacity. Like the entire tourism industry, we had some limitations on our people capacity to deliver services, but also on access to, initially at least, access to PPE. And then again, as I mentioned, public health requirements were not perfectly consistent across the country, and so we had to ensure that we adapted incrementally to those requirements as they shifted and changed. Like probably everyone on this call, we depend on revenues, and so our response had to reflect the fact that we were not making the levels of revenue that we normally would, and so we had to ensure that we were functioning within our budgets, but also we had to recognize, in a previous slide I explained some of these impacts to you, we had to recognize that Parks Canada is a significant part of the tourism economy, and so we had to ensure that our operations would provide some degree of visitation to not just Parks Canada places, but to our partners in the tourism sector. We also have contractual and legislated obligations that we had to meet. And we had to adapt and recognize that there are operators that are outside of our places, but also within. And we had to provide support to those partners in alignment with what the broader government suite of supports was throughout the pandemic period. And so you'll see that we undertook a staged resumption. Beginning in March, we'd, as I mentioned, halted operations. By June 1, we'd begun our incremental restoration of visitor services, as well as conservation activities. By the middle of June, we'd expanded operations and were able to launch camping on June 22nd. Throughout the months of July, August, and into September, we continued to expand our operations, particularly as we learned more and more, and were able to develop more and more tools to facilitate increased levels of access, even to indoor spaces. By the end of the fall, by shortly after Thanksgiving, we'd actually expanded our offering quite significantly, including a number of national historic sites. And we even extended season in a number of places to provide as much opportunity for operators as we possibly could to gain visitation and their own business revenues for the year. We're now moving into our winter offer, and we're beginning our planning for summer 2020-21, and also into the subsequent year. This next piece is just a short video. We had to focus a lot of our time and energy on informing our visitors how to best enjoy our places, and so this was one of the tools that we used. And so you'll see through some of the following images that we significantly adapted our visitor offer to the circumstances of COVID-19. And so some places simply could not open. Those that did open initially focused exclusively on outdoor use, either of outdoor green spaces and national historic sites, or day use areas, or trails. And in some parts of the country, based on our relationships with local community partners, we were unable to provide some offers at all, in the interest of ensuring that that those communities were not put at risk by the pandemic. So this is an example of a shared space at Kitchimacujik and physical distancing of our visitors. Outdoor use at Waterton Lakes National Park as well. As I mentioned, we'd undertaken to work as much as we possibly could locally, regionally, and nationally to support the tourism industry during this challenging time. Now, one of those initiatives reflected our status as a federal landowner and a landlord for a number of operators. And many of you will be familiar with the commercial rent relief program that the federal government implemented. We worked with the Department of Finance, but also with our tenants to implement a comparable program as a federal landowner at Parks Canada places across the country. But also working with the tourism industry, we actively promoted local visitation and regional visitation. We were a participant, of course, in Canada Nice, led by Destination Canada, and also the 2020 residential campaign. We also found opportunities to work with local destination marketing organizations and regional destination marketing organizations on promotions that touched, one or a few of our places in a region. And these are some great examples from Newfoundland and Labrador. I wanted to spend a little bit of time on the outcomes of these efforts, and these are probably numbers that won't be surprising to anyone who's in this session. And so Parks Canada's visitation reflected national as well as regional circumstances. And so at the national level, like all of you, our international visitation was dramatically impacted over the last 9 months. And so generally that, depending on the year, that quantity of our visitation reflects about 20 to 25% of the 25 million visitors that we receive annually. There were also, however, some other impacts on domestic visitation over the last few months. Some of those were regional bubbles, like the Atlantic bubble. Others were different types of limitations, for example, in our northern national parks that applied different types of restrictions or different types of bubbles. And then again, as I mentioned, some of our places chose to implement a very limited offer in the interest of helping our neighboring communities manage or mitigate the risks of COVID-19. But there were some other super interesting impacts, and we're now parsing this data by postal code and neighborhood in Canada. So very soon we'll be able to talk with you or others about the changes we experienced in who visited over the last 9 months. And so generally what we experienced was that across the board, compared to 2019 and 2018, we saw a reduction in visitation of about 35%. However, what that aggregate number does not tell you is that in most of our places in close proximity to urban settings, so within an hour and a half to 2 hours drive from urban settings, we experienced very high visitation. And in fact, at some of our national parks, we experienced unprecedented levels of visitation that actually exceeded previous years. And so not only did local audiences replace international audiences at our places, in those settings, we also saw them replace even a long-haul domestic visitation. And some examples are quite compelling. At Elk Island National Park near Edmonton, we had the biggest year we have ever had. At Point Pelee in southwestern Ontario, we had a significant year that exceeded all previous records. And then some of our most popular destinations were quite busy this year, and many of you, if you took the opportunity to enjoy a national park or a national historic site, would have seen not only high levels of visitation, but new types of visitors who probably had never come to us before. Now that led to some challenges that led to increased levels of visitor safety incidents and search and rescue, but also increased challenges around sanitation and care of our places. But generally, the story was a remarkable one for Parks Canada, and we're pleased that even though our visitation was low, our audience changed in important ways that we would like to consolidate in the future. Now, there are some other interesting takeaways for us that, that all of us probably saw happening in the media and in social media over the last few months. And one was, as I mentioned, an increasing focus on the importance of access to nature and natural and outdoor settings for individual well-being, health, wellness, and mental well-being, but also even community well-being. And so while the pandemic period began in March with I regret, a significant limitation on access to the outdoors for Canadians across the country, both in their communities, but also in settings like national parks and national historic sites. As we lifted those restrictions and invited Canadians to enjoy the outdoors in our places, what we saw was a very significant response. And we saw audiences that clearly had never visited us before. And again, we're parsing that data now, so we'll have a much clearer idea of who they were and where they came from. But for us, it was anecdotally quite significant. And it led us to do a lot of different things. In fact, it led us to significantly change how we were communicating with Canadians on how to safely use these places, how to take care of themselves and our settings while visiting, how to be safe, and again, how to access our places and how to avoid damaging our places through their behaviors. Now, this year, we conducted some surveys of visitor use. We did not actually break our protocols and survey visitors while they were at our places. We instead surveyed them by a national online and telephone survey. And the numbers there were quite significant for us. We learned a lot from that information gathering. And so 80% of those surveys that had visited a national park, a national historic site, indicated that it was important for their mental health. 78% said it was important for their physical health. And 82% felt that visiting these places provided a greater sense of normalcy. 83% made the choice to visit because they wanted to get out into nature. And again, some of this survey information found some other really important outcomes. We found that 64% of our visitors were comfortable traveling to a park or other outdoor space versus other destinations. And for example, 32% were comfortable traveling to a large urban center in summer. 80% were seeking opportunities to stay away from large gatherings or lots of people. So again, pointing them toward outdoor recreation and spending their vacation time in outdoor settings that allowed for safer activities in the context of COVID-19. So that is significantly influencing our plans for the future. And we've used this image just to demonstrate that we are planning not just for the coming the winter and the coming operational season, but also for the next 24 months. And we know that we have a lot of work ahead of us to continually adapt our service offer to do a couple of things. One, to keep Canadians safe, but the other, as I mentioned, to meet our objective of providing as much support as we possibly can to the tourism operators that are adjacent to our national parks and historic sites or who operate within them. So at this time at Parks Canada, we are undertaking a review of lessons learned across the network over the last 9 months. So our season ended roughly at Remembrance Day. As I mentioned, we extended season past Thanksgiving in a number of our locations. We are adjusting our winter offer already, and in fact, our winter offer made the news even last weekend with very high levels of visitation. So there again, we have established a series of protocols. We are flexible and adaptable, and will continue to adapt throughout the winter months. Over the coming few weeks, so beginning in early December, right up until March, we'll be finalizing our planning for the operational season of 2021. So that is the spring, summer, and fall of 2021. We know there again that we'll have to be adaptable to changing circumstances arising from COVID-19. And we are exploring opportunities to work better nationally, locally, and regionally with the tourism industry. And on that item, I want to emphasize that Parks Canada is only one of many park systems in Canada. And in my role, I am also a member of the Canadian Parks Council, which brings together the federal, provincial, and territorial park systems. And at a session we're planning for December, we are beginning a dialogue starting with Destination Canada, but then branching out to others, a dialogue with the tourism industry on how to ensure that the work that we are doing is as helpful as possible within the limitations of our own resources and our own capacity and our own protocols, but how to be as helpful as we possibly can to the tourism industry more broadly. Donc, à ce point-ci, je vais juste conclure la présentation, mais ça va donner à Michael et moi l'opportunité de recevoir puis répondre à vos questions. Et vous êtes libre sans doute de me poser des questions dans la langue de votre choix. So colleagues, at this point, I'm going to conclude the presentation as we head into our winter season and open the floor to questions that Mike Critchley will facilitate, and you should feel free to pose a question in the language of your choice.
Great, thanks so much, Michael. So our first question is from Kate Potter, and she is representing the 18 UNESCO Biosphere regions. And she just wondered if you have a couple of words about how the pandemic and the shutdown in general changes the way that Parks Canada will be doing business in the future.
Michael, that's an excellent question. And one thing I didn't touch on here, just in the interest of being concise, was that the pandemic also impacted our conservation programming, and so we had to implement a whole suite of new measures and protocols around the protection of these places, some of which are our biosphere reserves and UNESCO World Heritage Sites. We're taking away a number of lessons from COVID-19. Now, some of them relate to our digital presence. We'll be probably investing more in managing recognizing that people have probably made lifelong changes in terms of how they plan to prepare for visitation. One takeaway actually also reflects the mention I made of the broader parks family, the provincial, territorial, and federal park systems. And probably this was an experience shared by everyone in the tourism sector. The pandemic, I think, brought us closer together as park systems. We ended up working very closely throughout the pandemic period and coordinating our activities. And I think that actually will be one of the most significant changes for our agency in the future. Michael, we only have probably a few minutes left, it looks like, from your last message to me.
Yeah, Michael, I think we might have time for just one more question. We had a question from Julie Adamson, the Friends of Saskatoon Afforestation Areas. She's just wondering how Parks Canada collaborates with local tourism and how she might reach out for this opportunity.
Hey, that is an excellent question. And so, as everyone is probably aware on the call, Canada's tourism industry operates sort of locally, regionally, and nationally, and Parks Canada engages at all levels as well. And so at the individual park level, the folks should feel absolutely free to reach out to the field unit superintendent for the national park or the visitor experience or external relations manager. However, you can easily just reach out to me. I'm easy to find. I can be found on the Government of Canada website, we gladly can provide my contact information after this session, and I'd be happy to facilitate local connections. At the provincial level as well, it's easy to talk with me or to talk with individual park and site managers. If you're an operator, you should feel absolutely comfortable reaching out to individual field unit superintendents or park managers.
That's great, Michael. And just because we are out of time, I just want to remind everybody quickly that Parks Canada does have a booth here at the Congress. So please feel free to drop by. We have a number of staff there who can carry on the conversation. Donc, s'il vous plaît, vous pouvez aller vers notre marché pour trouver nos collègues qui travaillent là aussi. Merci encore.
Merci vraiment beaucoup tout le monde. Il m'a fait tellement plaisir d'être avec vous aujourd'hui.
Thank you for joining us for this TIAC talk. Did you know that networking continues even after the end of today's sessions? Don't forget to save time to catch up with your colleagues from coast to coast to coast. N'oubliez pas de réserver du temps pour vous rattraper avec vos collègues d'un océan à l'autre.